Welcome back to the series In and Out of the Fray. We are so delighted to be welcoming Mayor of Aurora, Colorado, Mike Coffman today. Mayor Coffman, thank you so much for being with us on SMT. We wanted to bring you on the show to speak to you about what you brought back with you after having spent a week among the homeless community in Aurora.
Sure. Well, actually, I was in Aurora and Denver. Probably more of a focus in Denver than Aurora. Mayor Hancock had reached out to me in 2020 about working jointly on a policy that would affect both cities, and so I didn't feel like I understood the issue, and so I ended up. Unfortunately, there was the first. Encampment that I wanted to stay in I should have checked before I went there. It was in Aurora, had been swept. Then I stayed in the Day Resource Center. I spent my first night at the Anschutz Medical Campus in a parking garage. And then the next day I went to the Day Resource Center. And then after that, that night I spent in a shelter in Aurora. From that point forward, then I went into Denver. And I think I spent about I stayed in three, let's see, I'm sorry, two different shelters in Denver and walked around the encampments during the day and then ended up staying in one encampment for 2 nights.
And when you were undercover, you're describing that some of the differences in the atmosphere between the encampments and the shelter. How would you describe that difference? So would you say that the encampments were mostly younger people?
Yeah, I would say, unfortunately, again, I didn't have the opportunity to spend time in an encampment in Aurora. They seem to be much smaller in Aurora, seem to be much larger in Denver, and yes, a much younger population in the encampments in Denver. I think the most surprising thing was that the encampment population and the shelter population never mixed, that they were two completely separate universes, and people in shelters never went to encampments, and people in encampments never went to shelters. I think there were 3 categories in the encampments.
Mm-hmm.
In the shelters. One, there were people that were economically displaced because of COVID. The lockdowns had just previously taken effect, and there were a lot of people that had been dislocated from their jobs, and particularly people that cleaned houses, as an example, that the public health officials came down and said, you shouldn't have non-family members in your house. And so a lot of them lost their employment and as a result couldn't pay rent and wound up in the shelter system. So there were people that had been sort of there for economic reasons. There are a lot of people that had been chronically homeless for a long time in the shelter system that were, a lot of them suffered drug and alcohol issues, probably more alcohol than drug, and older than much older than the encampment population by and large. And then there were people that were mentally ill, that were, I'm certainly not a mental health professional, but it just seemed that schizophrenia among the mentally ill seemed to be common, if I understand that diagnosis, that people would be talking to themselves, fighting off imaginary evil things, and never really interacting with others. And they were just were functional enough where they could navigate the shelter system to have a place to sleep and have some food. Those people that were economic casualties were ready to move on.
Mm-hmm.
The people that were mentally ill were just, we're not self-aware in terms of where they were. And then the big middle in terms of the chronically homeless, I think that a lot of them had applied and received disability, or I don't know a lot, but it seemed to be a goal of receiving disability, but not a big desire to move on in that population. So it's a very tough issue to deal with. I think in the encampments, people developed interdependent bonds with each other. They, a lot of drug use, unfortunately, a lot of crystal methamphetamine, some heroin, not marijuana or hallucinogenic drugs or anything like that. Pretty tough drugs, and they seem to be trapped in the world that they're in, and with little desire to move on.
In my own one-on-one dealings with various homeless youth, it was just my own personal experience that younger individuals who were homeless face different challenges. And I get the sense from watching your interviews that the older populations tend to have things, like the Medicaid and disability. And even the vets do have, from what I think, they have some vet benefits. Whereas the people in their late teens and early 20s aren't old enough to qualify for such support. And I was just wondering if anyone has taken this into consideration, creating supports that might be more specialized for those uh, younger people.
I think there is some discussion. I think there's concern among that are, to what extent are people that have aged out of the foster system, that have no familial ties, to what extent are they winding up on the streets? Veterans have a very robust network of support. So they're incredibly easy to deal with in terms of moving forward should they want to, because they have access to a lot of VA services. They have access to what we call HUD-VASH vouchers for housing. And so there are a tremendous amount of benefits for veterans who desire to move out of homelessness, and so, but that are not available to the rest of the population.
Mm-hmm. Did you encounter vets in your experience undercover?
I really didn't encounter too many, and we have in fact tried to have we have a homeless veterans pilot program that I worked on, along with Adams County Commissioner Steve Tedesco, and the contractors really struggled to find veterans and to be able to fill the slots in the program. And the fact is that we have an expansive definition. We used a HUD definition for homelessness, which is housing insecure, and we couldn't. We found that unfortunately the contractor had been taking some veterans from other programs where they were being helped in other programs just to fill the numbers. So I think that probably the issue for veterans is somewhat exaggerated. If the numbers were right, if we had a significant percentage of homeless veterans out there, it'd be pretty easy given all the resources that are available to them.
One of the things that came up in an interview was the idea that providing individuals with meals and gifts of money directly on the streets enables the problem. So, especially for those younger folks who are struggling with addiction, would it be better if each city had an addiction recovery fund where anyone could donate to that instead, or mental health costs, rehab, that kind of thing?
Well, I think that one thing that surprised me is that again, this is more Denver than Aurora, although I've seen it in Aurora, where people, bring food, water, blankets, clothes to people in encampments experiencing homeless, which was very, very robust in Denver. So you never to concern yourself with food or anything like that in the encampments. In fact, I ate better in the encampments than I did at the shelters. The
Wow.
So the issue is, is there, how to get money for drugs, and unfortunately, there's a fair amount of property crime that's been associated with encampments, and I saw some things indirectly, but not necessarily directly. I did see buying and selling of drugs inside the encampments, particularly meth. Stealing of bicycles, I think there was a question there. I didn't see anybody steal a bicycle, but I saw bicycles kind of piled up with tarps over them in Denver. So it seems like there's a way to get by, in the current system, but it's a pretty difficult lifestyle, obviously, and it's very destructive. And we have to, and it's really challenging. We have to try and get people, convince them to access services. And in the city of Aurora, I've been discussing with the governor and our Arapahoe County counterparts, in terms of having a facility in Aurora that will be along, actually, it will be just barely outside of our border, but we'll participate. That will be along the Fort Lyon model, and that is designed to help the chronically homeless who are suffering from drug and alcohol issues, and a very long-term type program. And so we have an entire campus that it was called the Ridgeview Academy, and it was for delinquent males who had some kind of altercation with the law. And it was actually a campus with a charter school, with athletic facilities, 500-bed facility, food service, classrooms, administrative buildings, a beautiful campus. And so it is empty now. And so our goal is to take it and convert it for those people. And I do think that for the chronically homeless that aren't severely mentally ill, that the biggest challenge is drugs and alcohol. And so this program, whether they're in an encampment or in a shelter, doesn't matter, that to take people that want to change their behavior. And it's a very long-term program. At Fort Lyon, when I went down there with some of the governor's staff, people had been there for 2 years and were just getting ready to complete the program. And I felt that I had confidence in them, but I just learned in talking to those people how challenging it is to break addiction. And so it won't be a 500-bed facility at the end of the day. It'd probably be about, maybe a 150-bed facility, because the fact is that those were young males that were 4 to a room. And so when we talk about a 500-bed facility, that's really 125 rooms. And so we think we can take some classrooms and create additional dormitory space, but we want, individuals in rooms, or maybe couples in rooms, but not 4 to a room. And so it will take that number down, but it will be a very robust program. But it's just such we just have such a hard challenge in terms of convincing people that to try and break the addiction.
Is there an age cap for a program like that or anything?
No, there's not an age cap. We're a participant in the program, but it's really going to be mostly state run because we don't have access to Medicaid dollars, and the state does. And so we'll participate in using some of our federal dollars that are coming down through the American Recovery Program Act, ARPA. And so we'll participate there. I think we're looking at 3 potential, we're looking at maybe 2 primary facilities, that being one of them for long-term program. And then we're looking at emergency housing in the city of Aurora, to have a facility that I would like to see as a 24-hour facility. They varied in Denver. I stayed at 2 different shelters in Denver. I think one was, it was called the Holly Center. I can't remember where it was. That was where you, run by the Rescue Mission under contract, both were. And that one, you went to the Rescue Mission for the evening meal, then you got bused there, and pretty crowded conditions. Unfortunately, drug use in there. But the one that, and then you go back to the Rescue Mission for breakfast, and then they throw you out for the whole day, and then you come back in the evening. I think that they had a facility in the vicinity of, it was in an industrial area around 40th and Colorado. And that was a much better facility. That was an old warehouse. Now, that was only for men. But it was well supervised. You had to go through medical, had to put all your things through medical metal detectors to make sure you didn't have any weapons or anything. And that was a 24-hour facility, so that you didn't, they didn't throw you out.
Yeah.
I think that's probably that's a better system. People that were, more challenged through, their finances were able to either do day labor or get jobs in businesses around that area. then come back and stay in the shelter at night, and then we're able to, to save enough. Their goal was to save enough money to get their own apartment back. But they didn't have the kind of drug and alcohol challenges that the chronically homeless have. So, but I like that idea of 24-hour facility instead of throwing people out for the day. And that, I think that's upsetting to, when you have a shelter and you do that, then it's the area around there that becomes your opponent, because of the fact that they don't like the idea of pushing people out and then having them hang out all day, waiting for the shelter to open up again for them in the evening.
I was wondering if you could maybe speak to a kind of a specific, maybe a case study, like say maybe a younger person who may have had some, who may have been struggling with addiction, but has made some steps toward maybe enrolling in certain programs, or really wants to get back on track, so to speak. I don't know if you're aware of other specific programs that have a rent cost, and which can be quite a challenge.
Well, I can only speak to what we have in Aurora.
Yeah.
And so in Aurora, actually, we have a Boulder-based nonprofit that runs a facility for us in the city of Aurora. And it's called the Bridge House. It's part of a ready-to-work program. And so I think, but it takes people that want to change their behavior, that generally suffer from addiction, but people that could have, mental health challenges, people that could, have a variety of challenges. And so that is an office building we have. I think it might be 6 stories or more office building that was converted for the purpose of this program, where the office spaces are made into dormitories. The conference rooms are made into classrooms. And so it's not as, it's not quite zero tolerance. I mean, you have to be sober, but if you have a relapse and, get back on track, you're not thrown out of the program. Whereas I think in STEP Denver is zero tolerance. If you, have one positive urinalysis or caught intoxicated in any way, you're out of the program, period. Where, we provide all the supports for them in terms of mental health counseling, in terms of, helping them become sober. But they participate in, besides, aggressive case management and counseling, they participate in either work training or actual work. So that's, I think that's a fairly successful model, but again, you have to have people. I think the challenge is having people that want to break that addiction. That's very hard to do. So, but I think that one, the one we're going to do at the Ridgegate Academy, that is strictly about addiction. And, again, a much longer term program, a robust program. The goal is really there are work training components to it, and there's obviously mental health counseling. There's all those things, but the big trick is to break the addiction. In that program, along the Fort Lyon model, if somebody breaks that sobriety, they're immediately removed from the program and put into some kind of detox. And mm-hmm. Then if they finish that, then they come back to the program. It's amazing how they feel that it's a contagion by having somebody there, people that are trying to break addiction, that if you have somebody that, fell, it's amazing that it is like an emergency thing where they remove them from the program. So we're going to be under that same model in our program, but you can come back, and people that leave the program and relapse, can come back into the program on the campus. So it's isolated. It's way off. It's kind of out there nowhere. But that's on purpose. That we want the population to be isolated, so that the temptations are less.
Right.
Nice. Nice. Having had a glimpse from the ground level, if there were things you wish employees work or who work for the shelters, social services, and policymakers within the city and state could come to an understanding about, what would that be? What would be the big picture piece of the puzzle that would be beneficial for everyone to keep in mind?
I think there should be required case management. When I accessed the three different shelters, that it was a choice, and I chose obviously not to do it. But the fact is, but it shouldn't be a choice. I mean, people should participate in case management to really to begin to connect with services. I mean, in each shelter, there are a lot of services that are offered, but I would say most of the people don't take advantage of them. But I think if they had if they were required to participate in case management,
Mhm.
in terms of staying there. I mean, again, I think, and that's the advantage of a 24-hour shelter probably versus a shelter where you throw people out in the day, is I think you have a better opportunity to work with them. So I think moving to the 24-hour shelter model, having mandatory case management, um, I think, to where, and I think we have to get more aggressive about requiring people to participate in programs. Yeah, otherwise you're just warehousing people. And I think that I just don't know how you're, at the end of the day, really helping them.
Mhm.
I mean, it's more intensive in terms of spending if you're going to help people uh, in the short run, obviously. But I think you save a lot of money in the long run by doing that. So, I would that would be the shelter that I would like to see in Aurora is a 24-hour shelter, kind of open like the one I saw in open, but people were spaced apart. Unlike the Holly Center where it was just a place to sleep, it was just you know packed, double bunked, uh,
Mhm.
you know bunk to bunk to bunk to bunk, and this is during the pandemic. Um,
Ooh.
but I do think that I think the shelter that I look for a model, except for I'd have more aggressive case management, was the one on 38th or 40th in Colorado in that vicinity. That was a former warehouse, had food service there, had shower facilities there, laundry facilities there, um, with bunks appropriately spaced out where you could secure your belongings, um, security to make sure that there were no fights or anything. I think it was a very well run, and I liked again the idea that was you could leave, you had to be back. I'm trying to remember what hour you had to be back. I think you had to be back by 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, and if you weren't back by then you gave up your bed. Um, but I think I think there's a model for. We just need to be more aggressive. I think about helping people, and some of that's going to be tough love and requiring people to participate in programs.
Mm-hmm. So I understand you went in when you decided to go undercover. You went into you were questioning whether the banning the campsites was necessary, and after the experience, you decided against banning the camps. Can you share with us
Sure.
that?
Because we didn't have the money. When you do that, you have to provide an alternative for them. At that time, we didn't have the resources to do that. Now, if you look at the federal money that's come down that we have access to now, we do have the resources to provide an alternate location for them. And so so I introduced it at a time, actually last summer, where in advance of the discussions that were going to come down about how to spend the federal dollars. And so the reason why the timing was, so you figure I was done on January 2nd, didn't introduce it until August because of the fact that the American Recovery Plan Act had passed. And so I wanted to make sure that dollars were prioritized accordingly to address the issue. And these are all one-time dollars, so they can really effectively only be used for capital construction. And so we're under discussion now as to should we buy a building and remodel it? Should we build from scratch? But at least we're having those discussions now, as well as the Ridgeview Academy discussion. So, I do think I do believe in a camping ban. I don't believe you should have people camping anywhere, and I believe you should, require them to be in a designated place where there's sanitation, there's food, there's water, and you can help them. I'm concerned about so Denver's ahead of us, so I can look and see what Denver's doing, and sometimes what not to do or what to do. Obviously, what to do is a 24-hour facility that I mentioned to you. That's a good facility with more aggressive case management. But I'm concerned about the safe camping sites in Denver, and that they're facilitating drug use, the very thing that we want to get these people away from, and so and not changing behaviors. And so I'm going to want to take a tour of one of those facilities. And there's a consulting group that's doing work for Denver that is said that they would share some of the preliminary findings with me about what the challenges are. So I really think a well-run shelter would be better than expanding safe camping options at this time.
Nice. Have you had a chance to speak with other mayors around the country, like Ben McAdams from Salt Lake County, Utah? I know Maureen O'Connor did this few decades ago, but if so, was there anything about your experiences that resonated among you all?
I have looked at and have spoken to different groups of mayors, and have looked at other programs, and spoken to some other mayors around the country. But I think my own experiences really resonated in terms of, that where I felt, going in and where I felt going out. I think having, been on the street for a week, and talked to as many people as I could, and I can tell you how difficult that was, because particularly, probably in the shelter, it was, I think, a little easier than in the encampments. But I think in the encampments, it was I'd try to talk to 20 people before somebody would talk to me. People living in the encampments. It was a little easier in the shelters to talk to people. But it's such a harder problem than I ever thought it would be. And it's going to be very challenging. I mean, it's part mental health, it's part economic, it's part cultural, and it's very complicated in terms of different pieces of it require, different courses of action in order to resolve. So I think we're going to try different things, and see what works and what doesn't work. I do think we need to provide minimum services for everybody, irrespective of who they are and what they've done and what lifestyle choices they make. But I really do believe that we need to focus the resources on people that want to change, understand that's very hard to do for them to do, and it's not going to be a short program. And like I mentioned, the Fort Lyon, we're working the one facility that we're working on. Is model along the Fort Lyon model, and again, when I went there, 2 years was not uncommon.
So, if you could jump in a time machine and go undercover again, would you do anything differently?
Well, I'd probably spend more time in Aurora. I mean, I walked, all the way. I started in Denver, walked all the way from Denver back to Aurora. And it was way out east of I-225, and found myself all alone in an encampment that I thought, I had been there like the day before, and I should have checked. And so I think they're very small in Aurora. I think the mental health piece is so hard. It's the hardest piece, is the mental health piece. And I don't mean people that I mean, I'm subtracting people suffering from addiction. I guess you could call that mental health. But there were people that I met in people in the shelters who were mentally ill. I mean, I feel sorry for, but at least they had the ability to navigate. They were functional enough to be able to access the shelters. But the people that I've met that are mentally ill, that are living in encampments, that actually they're not in encampments, they're out on their own. They tend, because what they do, so you give you two examples that of people that I've met doing not during the week that I was homeless, but just on the weekly outreach. Sometimes I'll go out with our outreach team and to look for people that are homeless and to offer them services and things like that. And the most chilling thing, I think, is people that are really, truly mentally ill. And they're on their own. They're always isolated. And they just, live very difficult lives. And it's so obvious the extent of their illness. So in both instances, actually, they were young women. Well, one was maybe 40s, one was 20s, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not a mental health expert, but I would imagine that they were schizophrenic. Now, there are medications that can stabilize them, but we can't force somebody unless it's a pretty high bar to be able to force somebody to mentally ill into treatment. And so we talked both of them into coming with us to the what we call the Day Resource Center to access services.
Mm-hmm.
But when we were en route, there was just a stream of consciousness that you would maybe talk to them, maybe they'd understand the first sentence of what you were saying, they'd respond to that, and then they'd go off in different directions that were totally disconnected. And that's the way their mind worked or didn't work. Mm-hmm. And I think the saddest one was I was out with the police one night and got a call from a Walgreens, which was in the vicinity of Chambers and Hamden Road. Chambers and Hamden in the city of Aurora. There's a Walgreens there. They said, we feel really bad about this young lady. She's staying, we have a loading dock that's covered. And and it was cold, and she was hiding in the loading dock. And they were concerned that she was starting fires to stay warm. And, so we went out there, and she was just so dirty. I mean, she was Caucasian, but black. I mean, just this black. And that you would try to, she was so hard to talk to because she could just lose consciousness and go off in some direction. But we talked her into going with us to the Day Resource Center and then the shelter. And so it was hard to talk to her. And so we get there and she goes, "Aren't you staying?" And so I talked to the staff. I said, "Please watch her, to see and to help her because I think she's just going to walk." And so they said yes. They would help her and everything. But who knows what? I mean, people are so ill they don't know that they're ill. And but she was pretty emaciated, pretty thin, but very. I mean, so the people like that just lead such wretched lives and. I just don't know what the solution is there. If you can put them on a 72-hour hold, but usually that's a pretty high bar, and usually they have to be a threat to themselves or others. And she was, I guess you might be able to argue that she was a threat to herself. Yeah, I don't know, but so I unfortunately didn't follow up to see what happened to her because we went out. My purpose was to. Go with the police and see how they were doing in terms of addressing crime issues. Mm-hmm. But there are people like that out there.
Well,
that's very hard.
That was one of the things that I had heard was a problem with some cases that that did suffer from mental illness is that they would get the medications. They would be sent to one of those facilities for a 72-hour hold.
Right.
And then they'd start feeling better, and then they'd have their medication with them, and it would only last so long. They'd be given like a 30-day supply. But there were two things that came up with different cases. One, they would either get mugged and the medication was then stolen from them,
Sure.
or two, like after that 30 days, they couldn't get to a physician to then refill it. And so then they'd start all over again. And then there'd be this cycle of they'd be stable for a little while, something would happen to their meds, and then they'd end up in another facility.
Yeah. No, it's
it's just hard. It's just so hard.
That's a part. That'd be the hardest piece to work on is people that are mentally ill, and I mean, they really need, and that, if they're not willing to take their medications, a lot of times that they'll just, I don't know, they're pretty stubborn about it. And but I think that's really hard. I mean, the reality is I think they need to be institutionalized to protect themselves.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but I don't see any other choice there. I think that I think you're right. If they're, first of all, people can prey upon them. Those people, and then I think secondly that they're just unable to take care of themselves. And I think that's the issue with it. I mean, either they refuse to take the drugs, or the supply runs out, or they get stolen from them.
Wow. Aurora Mayor Mike Coffman, it was such an honor to have this conversation with you today. I know this is a very complex issue, and we thank you so much for your time, and we'd love to have you back.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care. We hope you've been enjoying our series In and Out of the Fray. We conclude our series this Thursday, March 17, 2022, with some responses and final thoughts. We'd also like to invite our listeners to send in their comments about any part of the series by calling our voice message line at 303-731-6104 or emailing smtpodcasters@gmail.com. Your comments may be included in our series finale or in future episodes. Please stay tuned for new episodes on Thursdays as our spring season continues through April 7th. As always, thanks for listening.